The recent murder of NYPD's officer Jason Rivera has once again sparked needed conversation regarding anti-gun control. He, at 22 years of age, was gunned down in Harlem, New York. At the time, he was operating a domestic call representing the 32nd Precinct. So our condolences go out to Jason Rivera's family, his friends, and the NYPD community. To this end, it is important for us to recognize G-Unit as it pertains to gun control in America. Not the G-Unit that you're thinking about. The G-Unit that we at the African American Juvenile Justice Project are conversing about is goals, greed, gangs, gatherings, and government. What those 5 units represent as it pertains to gun trafficking in America, and why these guns ultimately find themselves in urban corridors, predominantly amongst Black and Afro-Latinos. To this end, we want to first talk about statistics and what they mean. So statistically speaking, we look to data that's provided by the Children's Defense Fund. 14% of the United States population are Black youth, yet more than 43 to 60% in some jurisdictions of gun-related deaths are Black children. When we also look to other data over the last recent years, 72% of all children killed in the United States by gun violence are Black or children of color. This is why we ought to be on the front line for gun control in America. AAJJP has been pushing several administrations to date in an effort to work with ATF, DEA, FBI regarding gun violence in our community and who is responsible for trafficking guns. And every single administration makes promises, and they're all broken. We're hoping that with the recent shooting deaths of Officer Jason Rivera and Officer Morrow and the 15 other officers who have been gunned down this year, that would be enough to garner the support from the men in blue and organizations like Noble, national organizations of Black law enforcement. We are looking to these type of entities to be able to take a stand with ATF and ask how, who, what, when, where, and why are these guns finding themselves in our community. So one, we look to the goal. What is the goal of circulating guns in the United States? It's generally about money. Sometimes it's as simple as hunting. And where you have jurisdictions like New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania that have strategically set forth gun laws that make it very difficult for the average citizen to bear arms compared to the 7 southern states, which in a state like Georgia, for example, is now trying to pass legislation that would enact a bill that would literally allow for individuals to carry a weapon without a permit at all. Those variants in legislation speaks to some of the convoluted issues that plague those who are on the front line to stop gun violence in America. Stopping gun violence does not have any effect on the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment is not impinged upon wherein an individual is looking to find ways to keep America safe. It does not impact the Second Amendment at all. Your right to bear arms legally and safely will not be disturbed. So that is a misconception. The Second Amendment rights are not infringed or impinged. You're not going to have that problem at all. What it will do through regulation is try their best to see to it that those who are armed are not trafficking guns into communities and areas where these people are vulnerable and more likely than not to utilize these guns in an effort to kill, steal, and destroy. That is not protected by the Second Amendment. It is your right, your personal right to bear arms, not your right to traffic guns across state lines from 7 southern states in the Midwest into the northern districts of the United States. We have a program called G-Unit. No, not that G-Unit. This G-Unit is about the goals, the greeds, the government, gatherings, and gangs. And those 5 entities or units, if you will, and their role with how guns are trafficked through the United States and how they're best used. So when we look at the goal, is the goal of guns in America to be trafficked? Or is it for your Second Amendment right to protect you and your loved ones? That was the origin of what the founding fathers thought of when they enacted and codified the Second Amendment. It was not for you to be able to purchase guns in abundance so that you can take those guns and sell them to vulnerable populations. That's not the goal of the Second Amendment. Next, we look to what is the goal of flooding Black and Afro-Latino communities with guns when you know or have reason to know that it will ultimately end in the death of innocent people, that they're going to be utilized for gang violence, that they're going to be utilized for individuals in domestic situations. That should not be the case. So where your goal does not align with the Second Amendment, you don't have a protection or a legal argument. Next, we look to the gathering. What is the purpose of community? Be it your immediate family or those that live within the community around you, your housing, your school district, your church community. What is the gathering doing about gun violence in America? It is unconscionable. I mean, it's just unconscionable. The tens of thousands of people that will proclaim that Black Lives Matter, but yet we're not taking to Washington, D.C. We're not protesting gun violence in America. We're not speaking about trafficking of guns into our communities that's leading our youth to die and innocent people to be killed. I don't think any officer who is acting within the scope of his or her duties, who responds faithfully and righteously to a domestic call, should be subject to being gunned down. And I don't think anyone should be supporting that agenda. The fact that the gun that was utilized in this particular homicide that he is being accused of committing was a stolen firearm is just the tip of the iceberg to what we at AAJJP experience on a regular basis and conversing with many of the youth that we work with. We're asking, where do you get the gun from? Who's coming into your communities and selling you firearms? How do you get these guns? Now, yes, some of these guns are being received by people stealing them from cars and from homes through burglaries. Others are breaking and entering into stores that sell them. But where that occurs and those guns have never been confiscated, that is a problem even for local police officers. Because there used to be programs wherein you can exchange a firearm, but those programs did not work because the people who were using them, who were engaged in criminality, they weren't going to exchange those guns. They make more money utilizing the guns in criminal acts than they would you offering them $50 to $100. So those programs look good on the table. They look good on paper and even better on the news. But they do nothing to curtail gun violence in our communities. So what is the gathering doing? Moms, dads, community, schools. What are you doing, pastors and churches, about educating your community, creating a gathering, a safe gathering place for the children in your community? What are you doing to educate them about gun violence? It is not enough that we wait to have these conversations at funerals. We all just really ought to be tired. But I think what is happening is we've become so numb in the Black community and that political machine that we call Black Lives Matter that is only willing to protest when the life of one individual has been taken at the hands of a police officer because we're claiming that that one life represents 1,000 more. Well, if we look to information and research provided by the Washington Post over the last 7 years, and that by Time Magazine, as it pertains to the number of Blacks killed by law enforcement, is about 1,200 per year. That is a lot. That is still a lot. That 1,200 people have been killed per year by members of law enforcement, and a greater percentage of that are Black. That is a lot. But when you weigh that to the number of people killed every year by gun violence in America, because somebody is trafficking guns into our communities to be utilized by the other G, which are gangs, that is a problem. So we ask, how do members of Crips, Bloods, GD4s, Vice Lords, Blackstones, how are they getting guns? How are Latin kings getting guns? How are these young street crews having access to guns? See, that's why I wore the purple, that mix of that Crip and that blood. And I'm just saying, I'm not repping one or the other. This is just a real conversation. And to that, I want all of you to be alive. I want all of you to have productive lives. I want all of you to stay alive. Your life does matter. You have to know that. And so with that being said, that is where ATF needs to come into our communities. You need to be in our school systems. You need to be having conversations in our churches. You need to be connecting with the gatherings. The power of those P's, the pastors, the principals, the parents, so that you can find out who's trafficking. But I get it, ATF. You already know who's trafficking guns into the Black and Afro-Latina community. You know where those guns are coming from. So how do we get you, ATF, not to get $1 billion in funds so that you can be part of a task force, but that you could utilize the resources that you have now? Isn't that what you ask for when you go to organizations and you seek grant funding from federal agencies? Isn't that what you propose, that you're going to utilize it for gun trafficking? So how are these guns still finding their way into our communities? There are cameras on almost every corner in the urban corridors in the United States. They're there at the schools. And yet, it is not those who are purchasing rifles to fire off on deers and go hunting with. These are individuals that are not hunting animals, as we know. These are individuals that are actually hunting humans. It is us who they are pursuing. And to that end, more often than not, they're not using what we would generally call the assault type rifles. They're using Glocks. They're using 357s. They're using 9s. They're using 40s. That's what they're using. Every so often you may hear, or somebody may catch a case, if you will, with an AKA. Every so often. But most of the time, that's not the reality. So you know who's moving this, because they have gun shows throughout the 7 southern states and the Midwest. You know where those guns are being sold. You know to whom they're being sold to. And if not, then that's where we need the check and balance from. We need to be inquiring why an individual is purchasing 5 to 7 firearms. We need to be inquiring what they anticipate on doing. Remember the other G as in goal? What is the goal of a person of going to a gun show and purchasing 5 to 10 firearms? Who needs that much weaponry? Again, Second Amendment is about you protecting yourself. Yes, many people will utilize guns to go hunting, but it's not intended to hunt human beings. So we look to the other G, the government. What actually are you honestly doing to stop gun violence in America? The blood that spills through the streets of Newark, New Jersey, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan, the boroughs of New York City, Atlanta, which has recently become like a gun haven. Unconscionable. And no, we're not going to blame it on outsiders. A lot of these people are born, fed, and bred in that state. And they have easy access to firearms. And if the recent passage of legislation that their governor is asserting he's supporting, which will allow for individuals to bear a firearm with no permit, no carrying permit, that's going to be problematic, even for members of law enforcement. Because how, therefore, are you able to differentiate between who's licensed to carry a firearm and who's not? How are you going to be able to determine in that moment if that individual is a felon or not? So where you have these distancing and opinions of what the Second Amendment authorizes us to do and what the Founding Fathers codified versus what we need to do as it pertains to what is actually happening in 2022, that is an issue worth examining in detail. So where you have gangs who have full access and they have more weaponry in part than most members of law enforcement, wherein when you're attempting to respond to a domestic call, you're not expecting to go into that call with bulletproof vests and helmets. You're thinking a mother needs help. Let's go in. Let's see if we could talk this out. Now, I wasn't there and I don't know all of the particulars. So forgive me if I incorrectly established a set of facts that are not there. But I know what I know. And what had transpired led to the death of a 22-year-old member of law enforcement who in that instant was simply there to protect a mother who placed the call. Now, if we're going to have these type of circumstances where we can't protect members of law enforcement no more than we can protect members of the general public, that's a problem. So ATF, do your job. You have enough resources where you can find where every single gun in America comes from. Every manufacturer is responsible for putting serial numbers on his or her weaponry. And we need to be able to track every single gun that finds its way into this country. That means those that are manufactured here and those that are finding their way. And that's where the CIA comes in. That's your duty. Whether you have to work with Interpol or any other international agencies, that is your duty to ensure that we ourselves don't become victims of terrorism. For us to be worried about what's going on in Ukraine when we ourselves have blood spilling through our own streets, that's a problem. That's a problem. We have to have something in place to ensure and to protect the most vulnerable populations. So when we have our goals and we have the government engaged and we have the gatherings in place and we are able to track what our gangs are doing and an effort to ensure that they themselves are safe, that they're able and that we're able to be safe, so that when you live in a community and you know that somebody is moving guns, you need to speak. That's not snitching. That's a good Samaritan, because you get to protect the community around you. And that is more critically important than anything else. And if we understand the goals, for some, the goals is to move guns because you know that the vulnerable population is going to get it. You know what they're going to do with that gun when they do. And you know that it's just going to increase the number of homicides among Black and Afro-Latinos. We understand that. And then there's greed. 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 That is the other G. It leads sort of to this dig mentality that plagues the Black and Afro-Latino community. Drugs, ignorance, greed. Drugs, ignorance, greed. And if I can add a few, drugs, drunkenness, ignorance, illiteracy, gun, and greed. All of those result in gun violence. And that's not to be disrespectful. That's our reality. When we are more interested in money than our lives, how can we profess that Black Lives Matter? And surely it shouldn't just matter when we have a police officer who brutally leaves his knee in the neck of an unarmed man on the ground for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, give or take. It shouldn't matter only when someone has their hands up and they're saying, don't shoot. It shouldn't matter when you know that an individual is unarmed and he simply has a cigarette that he has illegally or purportedly taxed. And he's telling you he can't breathe. Our lives have to matter beyond the political machine of police-involved shootings. This is why our community doesn't garner the respect that we need. Not from outsiders, from even within. Because we have to teach and reach each one. We have to be accountable and responsible for letting our youth know your life matters. And we are going to be on the front line to ensure that we can protect your lives. When we make them think that their lives don't matter, they get a gun. And everything from self-hatred to lack of parenting to not foreseeing or forecasting a future for him or herself to I just want it now, all of those become factors that result in our young children taken to the street and utilizing guns. Yes, there's a crew that operates that may operate with mental health issues, but we're not speaking about it through the lens of suicide, which is a growing issue in the Black community. And it is worthy of a conversation. But as it pertains to utilizing it to bring harm unto others, that is where ATF comes in. And wherein ATF would do its job and task force and partner with local agencies and CIA and the FBI, then even an individual who is attempting to utilize a gun to take his or her own life, and the gun may be illegal in that aspect, then there again, it shows worthy and it proves the need for you to step up and do your job. And it shouldn't take a police officer being brutally killed in the line of duty for you all to now partner with 9 states, Madam Governor of New York, because the streets in New York have been bleeding red. And I don't mean through the Bloods and the Crips. It's just been bleeding red for years under your administration as Lieutenant Governor. Yes, under your administration. And all the other states that you now want to bring in. Every single one of you knew and had reason to know about gun trafficking in your respective states. And I'm going to say this, and I'm wearing my purple, okay? This is the political side of wearing purple, right? I usually wear my green. Hello. When there was a comment made about gun trafficking in states like New York, there was a particular politician who made a response or a rhetorical statement on the wise of they're going to kill each other anyway, as if to imply that even if you take away the guns, blacks and Afro-Latinas will find a way to use knives and will find a way to use other avenues. But this goes back to the other G as part of that G unit, the goal. What is your goal? I can't quote your name because the article and the news report won't say who you are. So, but you know who you are. What is your true goal of being a politician? Because if it's about enacting legislation to improve America for everybody, then that's what you ought to be doing. But if it is predicated upon partisanship, be it Democrat or Republican, then I still think you're in the wrong place. Because even today in 2022, if you guys learned nothing about January 6th, it is the power of working across the aisle. That's the takeaway of January 6th, 2021. It is the ability to work across the aisle. It's not simply about sedition. It's not about Trump. It wasn't about Biden. It is the power to work across the aisle where the American people could see it, dissect it, and receive it. Because where they see the unity, you would never have that type of confusion. You just won't. But when they hear somebody like you say they're going to kill each other anyway, they'll just find another weapon to do so. You create that negative environment that allows people to feel like it is okay to take up arms and kill somebody. It is okay to traffic guns illegally to a specific community and target the most vulnerable. And you might ask, how the heck are gangs the most vulnerable? Because just look to why they're joining them. Many of them come from family units that are dysfunctional, not by your standard, but by our own. Lacking maternal or paternal guidance, caregivers, a school system that got rid of them a long time ago and gave up on them. A foster care system that the counties and state and local governments are supposed to man and to ensure that these children's rights matter and that their lives are supposed to be the equivalent with a foster parent as if they were coming out of the home of a natural parent, where social workers complain about being overworked and underpaid, and they know all of that before they go into that profession. So it's not an excuse. You don't have the same excuse as they did back in the 50s or 60s. When you know better, you do better. School systems that are denying them the IEPs, and those who do not fall under that category are still being denied the access to equality and equality in education. The inequities, disparity, the arbitrary, capricious, and discriminatory administration of laws and policies, imprisoned parents. And that doesn't have anything to do with the seep of how the holes that cause black children to fall through racism, classism, capitalism, and sexism, they seep through systemic, endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. So why do they join gangs? It's no different than the reason why most of us join sororities, a sisterhood, a brotherhood, service, scholarship. Except for them, those S's are streets, sex. Their S's mean something totally different, but it still gives them a sisterhood or a brotherhood. Ours connect us to scholars, theirs connect them to the streets. Ours give us credibility in certain environments, theirs give them credibility on the streets, in prison. That's the reality. It's no different than why you may have become a politician. For your credibility, to your sense of belonging, your sense of need to be powerful, to be on a platform. So if we're ever going to work toward resolving the issue of gun violence in America, we must be willing to work across the aisles. We must be able to separate the Second Amendment lies that people are telling that it's going to impinge or fringe upon that. It's not. For some people, it's impinging upon my Second Amendment. Others will say it infringes upon their Second Amendment right. Whatever which term you choose to use to define what you think it's going to do, whether you're legally right or wrong in your interpretation, you know who you are. The fact of the matter still remains, that is not what the Second Amendment was entitled to do. It was not codified. That was not the vision of the Founding Fathers. And we don't need people being in their community acting like militias anyway. So when G units come together and you recognize your goal, so the crew that falls under the goal, the Second Amendment, and then you have your gatherings, which is your parents, your pastors, your principals, the gatherings, the police, your prosecutors, your gatherings, your politicians. What are the gatherings doing? And then you embody the role of government, ATF, DEA, CIA, FBI, local and state policing agencies, in partnerships with communities, enacting legislation to address issues of what's really happening with gun manufacturers. I bet you if for every person that got killed, and I bet you if the family of Jason Rivera could sue the gun manufacturer and the persons or people responsible for a stolen gun being found on the streets of New York, I bet you then people will wake up, because sometimes tort litigation is the only thing that works. That's why y'all decided to put caps on it. And maybe, Congress, you may need to revisit that. Pursuing manufacturers. Could you imagine if they had to pay for all the blood that spills through the streets in any given weekend in Chicago or the Bronx or recent in places like Atlanta and Austin, Texas? I'm just saying. We must be willing to work collectively, because it is inexcusable that black children represent 14% of the United States population, but 43 to 60% of those killed by guns in America. When we know better, we must do better. Our condolences again to the family of 22-year-old NYPD police officer Jason Rivera.